Hey everybody. All right, Kevin here making a screen recording to assist you in thinking about the texture assignment, the graphic t-shirt assignment. All right, so I have this t-shirt file here. You can see that the shirt is on this bottom layer. Background and shirt, they're all together, meaning that this light gray here and that this dark gray t-shirt, they're all on one background layer. And then the element on top, that's the logo that I made. This is it. This is a logo that I made for a friend a long time ago. It's sitting on top, and this is something that I could potentially add texture to. However, I'm not going to use this one because I want to show you how to bring in something from Illustrator. I'm going to use a different thing. I'm actually going to use an element from my scale project. So before I do that, I am going to turn that layer off, the visibility of that off. I'm going to go over to Illustrator where I have this demo file from the scale assignment. And now one consideration I want you to think about when you're going to add texture to an element is the scale of the thing that you're going to texture and the scale of the texture itself that you're going to put onto your design element. So back to the Photoshop for a second. For example, this thin, delicate logo, you would just completely smash to pieces if you picked something brutal like that. You know what I mean? This is the kind of thing, like this, if you use that to texture this, it would just obliterate it. So keep that in mind. You want to choose your proportions wisely. And for the sake of this assignment, since I want to add lots of texture, I want to choose something that has a lot of body to it, a lot of coverage, because I want to subtract from that coverage. So I've actually decided to use this one here. This is just a quote. I love this quote. And it's text that I set in Adobe Illustrator. And I'm going to select it and copy it. So Command C. And then I'm going to switch over to Photoshop, zoom out, turn off the visibility of that other logo. And I'm going to copy and paste, or paste, because I've already copied. I'm going to paste that element, that text, into Photoshop. So Command V or Control V on a Windows machine. Now, you have the choice. You have it's like arguably too many choices here for how to place your graphic into Photoshop. In most cases, you'll probably want to choose Smart Object. The benefit of a Smart Object is that it sort of holds together all of the stuff that you might have created in another application. And then it gives you the luxury of opening up that smart object again later in the application that you use to originate it. If that doesn't make sense now, don't worry. Smart objects, we'll talk about them in more detail later. But you can almost kind of think of a smart object as being like a file inside of itself. It's kind of like an envelope that holds a complex piece of information, a complex graphic, essentially. I'm not going to go over all these options, but for this assignment, I recommend just choosing Smart Object and clicking OK. When you do that, it drops the graphic down onto your file in Photoshop. And you now get the chance to scale this and place it. What you're supposed to do is pick your placement and then hit enter or return on your keyboard to commit the change, to commit its position in Photoshop. So this is way too big for this shirt, so I need to scale it. So one thing that you'll want to be mindful of is always, whenever you scale anything, you always want to hold shift. At least that's how it works in Illustrator and InDesign. In Photoshop, some people, I don't quite get this, but when you hold shift, it does the opposite in Photoshop. There's a setting to reverse it, and I apparently have the setting to reverse it turned off. It's weird. Okay, so it turns out that option is in the preferences look for the general area, which is the first screen that you'll see when you open your preferences. And in the options settings, down at the bottom of the first column, you'll notice something called Use Legacy Free Transform. Make sure to turn that on, and then your shift button will behave exactly how you expect it to. At any rate, when you're scaling something in Photoshop, double check to make sure how your shift button behaves, first of all, your modifier key shift. Because you always want to make sure that you're preserving your original aspect ratio, the height to width ratio. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to make it about this big, and I'm moving this around by, I'm dragging and dropping by clicking on the center of this, or the interior of this element, and I'm changing the scale from one of the corners. And I'm just going to kind of get it into position where I want it. Now, something that I know about this is that I don't want it to be red. I want it to be white, and I'm going to change that in just a second. Now that I've found its position, and I'm good with that, I'm going to click return on the keyboard. It commits it. Now we can start to work with it. So I'm going to change its color to white because I don't want it to be red. I just want to make a standard black and white shirt. Or dark gray. This is a dark gray shirt. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. The easiest way without exception is to add a layer style to the layer itself and assign all the contents of that layer a color. This is pretty cool. You do this, you bring up the layer styles by double clicking the layer itself over here in the layers palette. But there are different zones to this strip right here. This line item here in the layers palette, if you click it in the wrong place, you won't necessarily get the features or the functions that you're expecting to see. So just to help orient you, obviously the eye toggles the visibility state. This thumbnail for your object itself has this little this little icon indicating that it's a smart object. Now, this is kind of interesting. If you double click this, what it's going to do is it's going to take you over to Adobe Illustrator. This is strange. Where it's basically created a new file for you. It's just called it vectorsmartobject.ai. This is the only thing that this contains is just the element that you originally brought into Photoshop. And I can modify this now. If, for example, if I wanted to change this to another color, click OK. And then I can close this file, closing it, and I'll save it as I close it. Now notice the original source, my original location where I copied it and pasted it from, nothing's happened here. This hasn't been affected at all. But if I go back to Photoshop, check that out. It updates. That's the power of a smart object. It's pretty cool. Now, regardless, I don't want this teal and red thing going on. I just want it all to be the same color because that's just, I don't know. I just want it to be a white, a simulation of white ink on a dark shirt. So, continuing to orient you here in this layer line item here. Another thing that you can click on is the text itself if you want to rename it. You double click on the text, graphic element, just call it quote, click return. But here's the thing. What you want to do, this area over here that's where there's nothing, it looks like it's the dead zone or whatever. There's nothing here. You double click that and bring up this massively powerful dialog box called Layer Style. Everything you do in this dialog box will apply to all the contents of your layer. This is enormously powerful. One that I use a lot, and people in general use a lot, is color overlay. Check it out. This applies a color to all the contents of your layer. This is a really useful way of applying one solid fill color to all sorts of stuff. You know what? Actually, I kind of like this cream color. That's pretty good. Click OK. Now, you can also change the blending mode of this too, if you want. Might not be too helpful for you, but it's worth noting that it's there. Blending modes, I find they're super unpredictable. It's hard to predict what exactly they're going to do. So in this case, I'm leaving it set, the opacity set to 100%. I'm leaving the blend mode set to normal. That way everything will behave predictably for me. There are a million other things that you can do inside here. You should check it out on your own time. Gradient overlay is particularly cool. You can just apply a gradient. I have to turn off color overlay in order for you to be able to see it. Boy, that looks pretty good, actually. You can change the angle of it, the scale of it, and the blend mode. You can do all sorts of stuff with it. You can do the same thing with patterns. But here's the thing. Here's the reason why I had to turn off color overlay. It's because they have a stacking order. This is pretty interesting. I'm trying to remember how to reorder these. I'm having trouble remembering how to reorder these. I thought it was just a simple drag and drop, but I don't think it is. I'm forgetting something. At any rate, you just need to be mindful that these things have a stacking order, and if something is on top of that order, it's going to be shown. Oh, right. So if I choose multiply, it's going to... if I choose multiply, then the color overlay will inherit the color of the gradient overlay that's right underneath it. That's how this works. Yeah. You know what? This actually looks pretty good to me. So I'm just going to click OK and keep that instead of simulating just white ink. I'm going to simulate some color. It's harder to print. It's harder to print for sure, but that's okay. We're not talking about budget here. We're just kind of having fun doing graphic design. So once you add a layer style to your layer, you have this little FX button here that indicates that you have some of those attached to your layer. You can turn off the visibility of all of them by clicking the eyeball next to the word effects here, and you can toggle the visibility of them individually if you want. Which is pretty nice. And then also, if you already know that you've done as much as you want to do with your layer style, you can collapse that back up into itself by clicking that up arrow. It just kind of puts them away, tidies up your layer a little bit. As I mentioned before, layers in Photoshop, layers are just intensely important in Photoshop. You might not even notice that layers exist in Illustrator or InDesign. You can work on entire projects in those two programs and not even pay attention to the layers at all. You can get by with just ordering the elements, bringing things up higher in the order by going up to Object and, move to front or move to back, things like that. You can get away with those kinds of things in Illustrator and InDesign, but in Photoshop, since a lot of the functionality deals with things at the level of the layer itself, you really need to be mindful of what all is happening on your layers. Especially when it comes time to making selections, which we'll talk about later. Selections are dependent on what you have shown and going on in your layers. So, layers are a big part of working in Photoshop. Okay, so this is pretty nice. Oh, let me show you something else while I'm thinking of this. These are also transferable. So let me double click the word effects here on this other logo and show you that here I've just added basically a color overlay to this logo. If I turn it off, that teal color, that's the original color that I created it in Illustrator. But I've simulated white ink on a black t-shirt through color overlay. You can delete this by dragging it to the trash. And you can transfer layer styles from one layer to another by holding Option and clicking the effects, the little effects word or icon or whatever, and dragging it and dropping it to another layer. Super cool. Actually, if I undo that, I think you can also right click. I think there's a way to right click and do it to copy. I don't remember. I don't really use. That's not usually how I do it. I usually drag it and drop it. I'm sure there's another way to do it. There's always like at least 3 ways to do everything in Photoshop. But I recommend just holding down Option on a Mac or Alt on a Windows machine and dragging and dropping the effects button or icon, whatever you want to call this thing, down to your layer. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. All right, so I'm going to turn off the visibility of this layer again because we're not going to use it. Turn on this layer. Let's get ready to texture it. This is kind of cool. There's a couple ways that we could do this. So let's go to our Unsplash album here, where you want to make sure to download the high resolution versions of the files that you're going to use. So I'm actually kind of interested in this one. This one's, yeah, that one's cool. Actually, I'm going to skip it. Let's do something else. There's so much to choose from here. And you kind of have to be thinking about what you want the end result to look like. You know, I'm a big fan of just sort of lightly texturing things. Some of these are just too much for my liking. Like this is this is super cool. But it's a lot of stuff. It's a lot of visual activity. Let's pick this one. This one has sort of like a nice mixture of small things and medium-sized things, and none of them are too large and too overpowering. Some of these things are just too large and overpowering. Like this would just kind of create this big distracting kind of moment inside of my text layout here. I just want it to be kind of small. So I'm going to pick this one. And remember, always download the real file. If you just drag this over into your onto your desktop or onto your hard drive, it's going to give you this junky file, this AVIF. I don't even know what that file format is. It's just a thumbnail file. It's not going to work. I'm going to delete that. You need to download the real file. You want to see .jpeg at the end of the file extension. So I'm going to click original size because I want it to be full size. I want the largest thing possible, and I'm going to put it into my folder, my project folder. And just to show you where that's at, I have this directory set up here. So graphic t-shirt inside of my texture learning module. So texture, graphic t-shirt, demo. This is where I'm working from. These are my files. This is the t-shirt mockup right here. These are 2 other files I want to use in this demo as well. So, but yeah, let's start with this one, this crackly one, and I'm going to close that because we're done. We're done with Unsplash. I have enough. I have enough JPEGs here. This is enough. So the next thing you want to do is start to think about how you're going to use your texture and which of the files you're going to use that you downloaded. And in this case, I already have opened this one here. This one, I also have this one. So I want to show you a couple things. So one of the things that the person does in that video where he's, what is it? The Aloha t-shirt. The Aloha, I think that's what it was. The Aloha t-shirt. He uses a file that's extremely high contrast that has all blacks and all whites. That's like a very important consideration when you're going to make a brush, a custom brush. Brushes, another very, like, it's like a very big part of Photoshop is working with brushes. Photoshop, by definition, is a painting program. Even though most people don't use it as a paint program, painting, or digital painting, the simulation of painting with brushes, is a really big part of working in Photoshop. And making your own custom brushes is just part of the experience. It's how you extend the functionality of Photoshop, by making custom things. One of those is a custom brush. That's pretty nice. So let's do that with this. Let's make a custom brush, which is essentially going to work as like a rubber stamp. And we're going to sort of use this crackly texture to subtract away from the ink area, so you see the quality of the t-shirt behind it showing through. So to get started doing that, you want to kind of crank up the contrast. And even though this is already a pretty high contrast image, we're going to crank it up even further, because when you make a custom brush, it saves those midtones. And sometimes you don't really want those midtones, because it won't give you a full, like a full strength hit with the brush. Now that's a terrible way to describe that. I don't know how to describe that. Sorry. Just you want like all blacks and all whites for your brushes, essentially. Okay, so something that you can do is convert this to grayscale. Discard all the color information. It's all gone. This is all grayscale now. Now we want to crank the contrast up. Meaning that we want to make the darks darker and the lights lighter, and we want to get rid of a lot of this hazy gray in the middle. So we have a few adjustments that we could use here. Curves is a really good one. Actually, curves curves and levels do a similar thing. They let you brighten and darken areas of the image, but curves do it in a better way. It does it in a more continuous way, meaning that it blends better from your dark spots to your light spots. But just for simplicity's sake, curves are a little more advanced. Just for simplicity's sake, let's use levels. And one of the benefits of using levels is that you get this really nice histogram. This shows you all the information in the file. And it shows from blacks, represented by this wedge here, to whites, represented by that wedge there. As you can see, most of the information in this file is white, or it starts to become white about right here. This is all kind of hazy gray, okay? But so anyhow, what we want to do is we want to compress this histogram. We want to make the whites whiter and the blacks blacker until we get a really punchy image. And you can even set your delimiters. This controls the boundaries of all of your these are sort of the governing sliders here that control the input and output levels, or excuse me, just the output levels, meaning that this is the totality of what you're changing in your levels palette. You can dim your whites if you want here, and you can gray your blacks here by dragging this slider. We don't need to do that for this, but I just wanted to make you aware that that exists there. It's pretty cool. That's particularly nice when you're editing photos and you want to, say you have like a blown out sky. Sometimes it looks nice to just kind of pull down the whites so the blown out sky in a photograph isn't 100% digital white. It kind of makes it look a little more realistic. So you can toggle preview on and off, and this is looking pretty good. This looks really good. This looks like it's ready to be my brush. And I'll click OK. And now to make a brush out of this, you have to do a select all. Now here's the thing. If you have multiple layers in your file, this isn't going to work right. You have to basically, when you do your selection, so edit, where's select all? I always do it from the keyboard. Command A. I can never find anything in the menus. Command A does it. Select all. But it's selecting all the contents of this layer. This is the only layer that we have, so there's no problem here. But if I had multiple layers, we would be telling Photoshop that we're trying to select stuff on the other layer that we have selected. In this case, I have the background layer selected. This is fine. This is exactly what we want. It's going to select, it's going to reference the cracks on the background layer here. Now, you go to Edit, Define Brush Preset. There's no keyboard shortcut for that, so you have to go to the menus. Therefore, I have that one memorized. Its location in the menu memorized, I mean. This is pretty cool. Define Brush Preset. So this is going to be our brush, and you get to give it a name. Give it a useful name. By default, it's just using the name of the JPEG. Crackle Lines. This is helpful. I mean, you want to be as specific as possible if you plan to make multiple brushes. Some people really get into this and make custom libraries for themselves. Illustrators get really into this and make custom libraries. If you do that, you want to start to come up with a naming convention like, maybe this is going to be like the first of several that you make. That look like this. And in fact, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's call this Crackle Lines 01. And there it is, ready to go. But we're not going to use it yet. I'm going to hit Escape on the keyboard. Oh, Escape. No, Escape doesn't actually undo that. So I'm going to switch back to the regular select tool, the selection tool, to basically just not have my brush active. I want to do something else. I want to make another one to show you that you don't actually have to do a select all. You can define a certain zone. So you can grab this tool over. Oh, actually, you know what? Let's do this tool right here. Let's make a circle. This is called the marquee tool, and this is how you define certain parts of your Photoshop document to work with. You activate certain parts of your document. These are called selections. These are selection tools. So I'm going to use this circle one, which is kind of nice. And this works the same way as drawing circles in the other program. Oops. Undo that. It zoomed in for some reason. This works the same way as drawing circles in the other programs, meaning that if you hold down Option, it'll draw it from the center of your click, which is really nice. And I'm going to hold Shift, which is going to keep this circle in proportion, so it's a circle and not an oval. And now you can go up to Edit, Define Brush Preset, and it's making a circle brush. See, it's only using the area that I've activated, the area that I've selected with this marquee tool, this circular marquee tool. So, oh my gosh, what did we call that last one? Crackle Lines, I think. I think we called it Crackle Lines. 02. This is the second. Click OK. Really nice. Really nice. So we're starting to build up our own custom library. That's pretty cool. And by the way, from the keyboard, you can do Command D or Control D to deselect your selection. That's pretty nice. It's right. Oh, that's where Select All is at. And then deselect is right underneath it. These are really nice keyboard shortcuts to remember. Command D deselects your selection. That's a really useful thing to know. All right, now let's do our little bit of texture. Now that this video is getting super long. Oh my gosh. Okay, there's a couple ways that you could do this. One of them is you could actually just use your brush. You could just color on top of it, or you could use your brush to delete. There's an eraser tool over here which uses your brushes, but we don't want to do that. We want to use the brush in a non-destructive way. That's a term you'll hear all the time when it comes to working in Photoshop. What that means is you want to use the strengths of Photoshop, the features inside of Photoshop that allow you to modify your edits. In other words, your edits aren't set in stone. You can remove them or delete them or modify them or change them or copy and paste them or whatever. That's called non-destructive editing. If you were, so just to kind of clarify that, a destructive edit would be these up here, the adjustments, just so you're aware. So if I wanted, for example, if I went into, say, curves, and I started to change, say, I started to change some aspects of the color of this image in the curves, dialog box here. I click OK. This just made a permanent change to this layer. That change was permanent. As opposed to, I'm going to undo that, as opposed to a non-destructive edit, which you can do the exact same thing by clicking this layer right here, this button right here, and choosing curves. This is an adjustment layer. This is a layer, I'm going to make sure that this applies only to my shirt. So I'm going to move this on top of the shirt. And you get the exact same functionality right here. But it's non-destructive. Meaning that you can turn the visibility of this on or off. You can drag this around and put this onto other elements. You can delete it altogether. Or you can duplicate it. That's the power of non-destructive editing. This is just one small example of that. Whoops. But keep it in mind as a way to work. There's almost always a way to do something destructively in Photoshop in a non-destructive alternative. You should always be looking for the non-destructive alternative. Okay, so getting back to what we're going to do with our brush, we're going to non-destructively texture this text by adding a mask to this layer. Click the mask button. Now, remember how I mentioned a lot of stuff is going on your layers at the line item level of your layer. Now we see another icon here with a chain link on it. This is your mask layer. Nothing there. This mask isn't doing anything right now. It's white. There's no contents on this mask right now, but we're going to change that. We're actually going to start to do our brush work on the layer mask itself, not the layer, not the actual text, but the mask that's on top of it. It's pretty cool. And then you can, by default, the layer contents and the layer mask are linked, meaning that you can drag and drop them and scale them and they'll stay together. But you can also unlink them and change the scale or position of those independently. Just keep it in mind. For the most part, you always want to leave them linked. Okay, so let's grab the brush. So now, when you make a custom brush, it saves it at the level of the application itself. That means if you make a custom brush, it's going to reside in your particular installation of Photoshop. That means it'll be there on all your different all your different files in Photoshop. In other words, it's not installed at the level of the file. And that's important because I made the brush here in this file, but I want that brush to apply to my work in this file, and it does. That's because it's installed at the level of the application, not the file. Pretty cool. Okay, so when I grab the brush tool, you can select your brushes from up here. There's a bunch of there's a bunch of brushes here that are here by default. So many of these that are by default, but the real power of Photoshop. Oh, actually, and then this is a set of brushes that I downloaded from an illustrator, Kyle's Splatter Marks, Kyle's Concept Brushes. These are custom brushes that I downloaded from an illustrator, a well-known illustrator. I can't remember his last name, just Kyle. Kyle's the first name. But then there are a ton of brushes that are already installed. And you can change things like the dynamics of how it lays down onto the surface. To be honest with you, I'm not an illustrator, so I don't do this. I don't work that intensely with brushes, to be 100% honest with you. I just do basic stuff like this. So my circle, my crackle _lines_02 is selected. So now all I really need to do is change the size of this. And I think that's probably pretty good. Maybe about like that right there. And what you want to do is color black, jet black, 100% black, digital black from the foreground selection over here. You want your brush to be coloring black onto your layer mask. And when you do that, it's going to subtract from what's essentially your ink color. And you can start to see the marks that we've made on the mask itself with this brush. You can switch to, like, if you want to just kind of see this, see a better example of this. See, this is a big brush. I'm coloring black right here, a black brush coloring onto the mask. You can see the blackness of that brush there. But what it's doing is it's actually just subtracting from the mask. It's taking it away. This is a way that you can edit things, like if you want to just kind of crop out a certain area. You do it with masks and selection tools. You could also do this with a marquee. So, for example, you could select an area and then select inverse. So now everything except for the word "the" is selected, and you can just I always forget the shortcut for this. Option delete. Yeah, Option delete or Alt delete fills with your foreground color. So I just filled all of this selection area with black, my foreground color, from the keyboard. Option delete. And you can see that it filled up most of the layer with black right there, allowing just this, the word "the" to show through. And now you can kind of like reclaim that area by coloring white onto the mask. So I'm just going to deselect. So Command D, grab my brush. This is just a regular round brush. And you can change your foreground, your foreground and background color. You can reverse them with this arrow right here, or reverse them by hitting X on the keyboard. X changes the state of the fill, which is really nice. And then another nice shortcut too is if you do have a color selected, you can hit D on the keyboard. D resets your foreground and background colors to 100% black and 100% white. That's a really nice shortcut. D resets them so you know without a shadow of a doubt that they're black or white. And you constantly want to be setting your fill color, or excuse me, your foreground and background colors to black and white, because working with layer masks is a very big part of Photoshop. And you manipulate your layer masks with black and white coverage. It's binary. It's either covered or it's not covered. You can use shades of gray, tones, but for the most part, people tend to use all blacks and all whites on their masks to get the strongest differentiation between whether the mask is activated or not. But with white as the fill color here, you can actually just kind of color back your area. So this is pretty cool, including the brush mark that we made a few minutes ago. So it's all back. It's all back. And you can see right there, I've just kind of colored in white that area to reveal that section of my graphic. But if you really want to be thorough, you can fill everything. You can fill this entire mask with white by doing the thing that I just did from the keyboard, Option or Alt Delete. And it just fills it all. You can also do it with the paint bucket. The paint bucket over here, which I haven't used in like 20 years, the paint bucket, which is a really clumsy way of filling with color. I can't even remember where it's at in the menu. I think it's over here. Yeah, paint bucket. Yeah, so it just fills with your... Yeah, it just filled the entire layer mask with black. You can switch your colors with X on the keyboard, and now it's going to fill with white. Yeah, paint bucket does it too. Paint bucket, by the way, is like one of the very first tools put in Photoshop. It's like 20 or 25 years old, maybe even like 30 or 35 years old. Anyhow, that's one way that you can texture your graphic. That's a pretty cool way to do it. I'm going to delete this mask and kind of put it back to the way that it was. And then I want to just do one more thing. Let's use this file to make another brush. Yeah, let me show you a way that you could use this file. This file is full of midtones. This one is not going to act like our crackle brush that we just made, because it has so many midtones. So if we start to follow the same process, image mode, grayscale, discard the color, look at all of these midtones. I'm particularly interested in these droplets of water on this glass. I think that's what this is. So a way that you can kind of select those out or get to those, there's a million ways, but I'm going to show you one. And that is to invert this image, invert the colors. This is pretty cool. Image adjustments, invert. This is a destructive edit. If you were concerned about wanting to revert back, you would just duplicate your layer. So let's see, what should we call that? I don't know. We don't need to call it anything. I don't need to call it anything. This is just a demo. I'm going to turn off that background layer, and we're going to do our destructive edit to this layer. So image adjustments, invert. It takes all the color information and completely inverts it, making essentially a digital negative out of it. Now you can do the same thing. And actually, let's do this non-destructively. Let's grab, I'll grab curves to do this demo here. So I'm going to put a curves layer on top, and here you can brighten and darken by moving these points around. This is a little bit more of an advanced technique. It's more advanced than using levels. But you move these points around until you get, basically, I think that looks good. But I only want just these little splotches. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more edit with levels. I'm going to put levels on top. I'm stacking these. So there's two adjustment layers. But I want to get rid of this hazy gray here. And I'm just going to brighten up the white points, bring down the white points to the point where that haziness goes away. Yeah, that's good. And then I'm ignoring what's happening over here. I'm ignoring what's happening over here. And just so you can see what happens here, I'm going to change, I just right-clicked on my negative space here and chose a different color. I'm just going to choose light gray. I prefer to work with all white. That way you can kind of see, well, there's a lot of reasons to work with all white, but one of them is you can use stuff on the outer areas of your artboard, or your canvas in this case, which is really nice. But I changed it to light gray here so you can see the boundaries of this, because we have an image that goes to complete white. So I want you to be able to see it. But what I want to do is I just want to capture this stuff right there. That's all I want. A really nice way to do that, before I move any further, I'm going to actually flatten this. I'm going to get rid of my curves, levels. I'm going to commit this change, essentially. And I'm going to, I selected these three. I'm going to pick this hamburger flyout menu here, and I'm going to choose merge layers. So the 3 layers that I have selected are now going to get collapsed into one. Command E is the keyboard shortcut for that. So if I use Command E or Control E, it just smushes them down into one, which is pretty cool. Now I'm going to actually just, since we're working with all blacks and all whites here, I'm just going to use a big fat white brush to just get rid of all this stuff. That stuff that I don't really want. Yeah, and then that's about perfect. So anything that's speckled and black right now, that's what I want to use as my next brush, because I want this to be a little more subtle. Not so big and sweeping and overarching and powerful. I just want some little like dust kind of stuff. But now that I've removed all of this stuff around the top and the left edge, I want to get rid of that, and I can get rid of that automatically by going up to image trim, which is really cool. So image trim will actually get rid of a bunch of your dead space, your unused space in your Photoshop document. And you can have it based on transparent pixels. In this case, we don't have anything transparent here, because we have a white background and black pixels on top of it. So we need to choose top left pixel color, which is white. Sorry if this is confusing, but you'll see what it does in a second. It needs a reference. And in this case, we're giving it, we're telling it to trim away all the white stuff up to the point where you get to the black stuff. Actually, this demo, I think, would be clearer if I showed you an example with transparent pixels. So I'll do that at another time. But for right now, I'm just going to choose top left pixel color and click OK and watch what happens. It just deleted all the extra stuff away up to a point where it finds there to be some color. So if I zoom in, you can see right there, there's a tiny little gray dot. And then along the top edge here, there's probably another little gray dot, because that, yeah, there's some marking right there. That's what it was looking for, is it was getting rid of all the unused space to give you the tightest possible crop on your image. Pretty cool. This is particularly nice when you're about to make a brush so you don't have any unused space. Or, you know, this could be a utility file for a lot of reasons. Or and you could use it for different, like you could repurpose this right here. You could save this as a JPEG and give this to someone else so they could use it as a texture file in their own way, in their own workflow. But here, what I'm going to do is the same trick. I'm going to make my selection, so Command A, go up to Edit, Define Brush Preset. And it's important to make sure that you're selecting the area that you want to make the brush. I'm making sure that I don't have the background layer selected here in this case. I just have this, it's called this layer Levels 1 because that was the topmost layer when I did the merge. It inherited that topmost layer's name. That's why it's calling it Levels 1 here. But this layer is where our little dots are at. Let's call this dot marks 01. It's always good to sort of like add a number to things in case you end up appending to them or doing more as a series or as a sequence. In this case, yeah, this is a cool brush. Let's close this file. We don't need it anymore. Don't save. And we're back here to this document. And now let me show you something else that you could do here. So in the previous version, what we did is we subtracted from our ink area to show the shirt behind it. But what if you want to add more splatter to the ink itself? Like we want more splatter around the edges that's gonna be printed in this same blue gradient that we've set up here. So you can color onto your layer. Now, but you have to commit to your. You have to rasterize your smart object. This smart object, you can't paint onto it. The only way that you can paint onto it is if you convert it to actual pixels, because it gives you a data mismatch. Brushes are pixel dependent. They're based on pixels, but a smart object is not. Smart object is essentially a self-contained file. Hard to describe the reason for that, but you can't brush onto a smart object. You can brush onto another layer on top of it. But in this case, we want to contain those. Oh no, you know what? A better way to do it would be to make a folder, which is exactly what I'm going to do here. So we're going to color onto layer 1. Let's just call this dot splatters. We're going to color on, we're going to use our brush on that layer. But what we need to do is put dot splatters and graphic element into a folder. You select both of those and click the folder button and it calls it a group. Let's just call this t-shirt graphics. Let's delete this so we're not getting distracted with that. Now, this is cool. So you can take that, you can take your effects that you applied to this layer and move that up to the folder level. This is extremely powerful. Now, anything that you do inside of that folder, it's going to get that same coloring, this same combination of color overlay and gradient overlay. Now, this is really cool. So dot splatters, which we haven't done anything with, you can grab a brush and color in black or anything, any color at this point. It's not visible. It must be too big. Where is it? There it is. Yeah, it was too big. So there's our dot splatters. Let's zoom in. And actually, these marks might be too fine to see. They might be too small for this. But if you stamp around, you can see that it's adding, it's making them blue. And it's because of that overlay. See, I chose black, so I was marking with black onto this empty layer called dot splatters, but it was getting colored by the effects at the level of the folder that these two layers are inside of. Hopefully that's understandable. I know it's a little complex, but this is a pretty common way of working in Photoshop. Layers, layer styles, grouping the layers together with folders, and using masks. You can also use masks at the folder level as well. So you could do something like this where you put a mask onto the folder and then you could color black onto the mask and then subtract from it, which is kind of cool too. So I'm doing a combination of things there. So we've added splatters that get colored blue to this outer area, and we're using the same brush to subtract away from the inking area, or the area that's supposed to be simulated ink. Just to make this clear, let's switch to where are my brushes? Let's switch to Crackle Lines 03 here. Zoom out, and yeah, it was pretty big. Pretty big. So you always want to pay attention to the size of your brush. If you see that your brush is not visible, then you might have a scale issue. You might need to change the size of it. You can do that quickly here with this slider, but it's nice to just be able to do it from the keyboard. Yeah, look at that. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. So we're subtracting away from the mask, which then makes it look like you can see the shirt through it. And then we have this layer that's basically adding to it. So you could actually continue to color onto this layer as well. So if now that this layer is selected, let's see, check that out. It's easy to overdo this. Clearly, you could end up making stuff look extremely silly by using too many textures. But all right, there you go. I'm going to wrap up this video because I think that demonstrates a lot about how to use textures and all of these different techniques, bring them all together to make a pretty interesting end result. All right, there you go.